Hey everyone, good morning. Maybe it's afternoon already where you are because I'm late today. We're on the road today, so you're seeing me from the interior of our car. Mr. Producer is sitting beside me. He gets a front row seat for this. I'm Susan Smith. In case you're new here, I am coming live every day for 30 days on YouTube talking about topics surrounding machine quilting. I believe today is day 12. I need to look properly at my calendar so I know that each day, but I think it's day 12 today of 30. So if you have questions or thoughts or questions arise during these episodes, feel free to email me, info@stitchedbysusan.com, and I will certainly consider them for some of these topics. And some of the ones we're talking about, and particularly today's, have arisen out of these conversations. So let me know where you're tuning in from, and let me know if you're new to these lives or particularly new to my channel. I am, a machine quilter, particularly a long armor, and I'm a practical girl. So I like talking about these sorts of topics that are real. They're decisions, they're challenges, they're things that we encounter in our day-to-day quilting. So that's the kind of channel that I have. So if you're new here, welcome. I hope that you'll find a lot of encouragement and helpful ideas here. Janice in Texas, Charity in Minnesota, Angela in Alberta. I'm sorry it's shaky, you guys. That's just the way it's going to be. It's all natural today. Lauren in cloudy Illinois, Pat in West Virginia, Patricia, hey Susan, you do awesome work, thank you. Linda in West Michigan, just finished up an all over feather charity quilt, awesome. Vonna, Carol, Kathy, Donna, Julie, great, so good to see you all here. Okay, today's topic is where to find quilts to practice on. So you want to be a free motion quilter, particularly edge-to-edge designs, right? Same quilting over the whole quilt top, but you don't have that much scrap fabric. You don't want to practice on your precious quilts, right? Or the precious quilts of your friends. And you don't want to make just a bunch of waste products that are not really good for anything. How do you get the practice in? Because it does take practice, right? So I have some really practical ideas for you. And I think the simplest one would be if you have ugly fabric in your stash that you're not attached to, or it's as old as you are, as some of my fabric is, then, maybe you want to consider literally just loading a yard or two of that, something ugly on the back and something ugly on the top, it doesn't matter, and even some batting scraps in the middle. So that is certainly one option. I mentioned yesterday, and I'll mention it again, you can quilt all over the surface of that, and then you don't have to take it off and reload. You can literally just put another piece of fabric on the top and quilt all over it again, and you can do that 3 or 4 times until it gets so stiff that the quilting is starting to mess with the tension in the stitch formation at that point. But you can do that several times using less fabric and definitely requiring less time to reset up your long arm if indeed that's where you're working. So that's one option, using up ugly, cheap fabric, even fabric that has a weird fiber content. You might not get as perfect stitches on it, but if the thread path and the movement of the design is what you're focusing on, even that is not really critical, right? So if you've got some mixed broadcloths, polycotton blends, whatever, that's totally fine for practicing on. People make dog beds with them and pot holders with them, and so these are the sorts of mug rugs, these are the sorts of little things that you can do where it's not altogether wasteful. Something can be made out of them. And as you get a little bit better, you can make longer wearing things like cosmetic bags or pouches to hold your projects in process, things like that with some of your little quilted pieces. But I wanted to talk today more specifically about some sources for quilts that are already pieced by someone else that you can practice quilting on. So first off, if you are a member of a local guild or if you have access to one, consider asking there. Most of the guilds that I hear most of the quilters that I hear talking have a local guild, right? And most of those guilds have some kind of comfort quilt arm. They might call it, ours is Charity Central, but there might be other things. There might be Quilts for Cancer. I know there's Quilts for Cops. These are different things where sometimes the organization produces the quilt tops. So there's other people volunteering to do the cutting and do the piecing and so forth, but they're looking for quilters. So that's the kind of quilts you want to look for because it comes to you ready-made. Usually comes with backing and batting. excuse me. And your contribution then is thread, probably, and your time. And it gives you a chance to practice. And most likely these quilts then are not going to discriminating recipients, so they're not going to care if you're just practicing your meander or your loops, or they're wobbly, or you make mistakes or crossovers. Like, they're not going to care, right? Just get some quilts done. So it's a great way to practice. And then, if you have causes that are dear to your heart, ask questions about that. My local guild, I know, does quilts for we have some specialty hospitals in my city, so they do quilts for cancer patients particularly. They do quilts for foster kids particularly. So you can kind of ask where these quilts are being donated sometimes. And some of these organizations, in fact, you can go ahead and put the binding on the quilt and deliver it. You just let the organization know, yep, check, I made a quilt, I delivered it to such and such, and there you go. And that's all they want to know, is that it got given, right? So that's a really good resource. Local means then that you can usually drop off and pick up and don't have to mail things back and forth. But there is an organization that lots of quilters are familiar with that is mail-in, so will require a bit of effort. But it's called Project Linus, Linus. So you can Google that and find, I'm sure there's local chapters. It's a big organization. I believe it's North America wide. It's for sure United States wide. There might even be chapters around the world. I'm not fully sure. But you contact them and they actually will send you the parts of a quilt, the top, the backing, and so forth. And again, you just do the quilting and then return it to them. So that does involve some postage and mailing and organization, but that option is absolutely out there. Let's see some comments before we keep going. Kathy, Donna, we saw those. Julie, another Linda, Kimmy, Pat, I bought my long arm because of you. I'm so happy to hear that. I love that. Scrappy Quilter, G, Ladisseur from Quebec. Janice, my first live, awesome. Wendy, I really am sorry about the shaking. It's not too bad, I hope. Renee, Patricia, is all over meandering good on a t-shirt quilt? All over meandering is never wrong. I'll be honest with you, Patricia, personal opinion here. Meandering is not the easiest thing to quilt because you're always changing direction. And in my opinion, it's not the prettiest thing to quilt. You might consider something like loops or double loops, but it's not inappropriate. So if you like meandering, if you've figured it out and are comfortable doing it, it absolutely works on a t-shirt quilt, really on any quilt. Again, if I was doing it all over a quilt, I would prefer it to be smaller, and by smaller, I mean, maybe 1.5 or 2 inch kind of knobs, as opposed to the big 5 or 6 inch ones that I sometimes see. I don't feel like those big ones wash up into the nice quilty texture, but you're subject to my opinion in this case. Jana, good morning, and Sherry, good morning. Awesome. So I'm curious if any of you know of more resources for acquiring quilt tops that need quilting, that aren't too choosy about the perfection of their quilting level. If you want to chime those in, that would be great. These are just some of the ones that I know and am familiar with. Certainly places that, like hospitals and NICUs, and I mentioned cancer clinics and things like that, they are always looking for quilts often for families in need or for a patient in need. Perhaps they have treatment and they've always got cold feet, and so they need a little lap quilt. Like, there's so many good reasons to finish quilts, and I'm sure if you've got any kind of local organization or even asking at a local quilt shop, you can find out what's available in your area for a place that you can make quilts and finish them and feel really, really good about giving them. Another good feature of these types of comfort quilts is that they're usually small or smaller, like much smaller than a twin. They're a lap quilt or smaller even than that. So 40, 50, 60 inches. And these are perfect practice quilts because it's not so intimidating starting with something big. And if you're trying out a new design, for example, and you don't care for it, you don't have a big commitment either. You just got one little quilt to finish and moving on. But I will say, for the purposes of practice, If you are working on a new design, let's say you've just taken my all over feather free class, by the way, link is below in the description if you haven't taken it yet and want to. But say you've just started doing those all over feathers and you really want to nail down that design, then I suggest you do it on 2 or 3 of these small quilts, one right after another. And that massive repetition really nails down the motion and kind of helps you, like, just figuring out how to move around the quilt top, or in the case of the all over feather, you're always turning corners. And so it just helps you kind of figure out that spatially just by doing it over and over and over again. But I honestly do that with any new design that I'm coming up with. I will end up repeating it on several quilts. It ends up evolving a little bit. I tweak things a little bit and it just improves over the course of several quilts. Where if I just do it once and then don't do it again for 6 weeks or 2 months, it doesn't get that chance to just really gel and really take shape. So that's my learning curve, at least. Yours may be a little different. Oh, Wendy is saying Project Linus has many local chapters, no mailing. Good to know. Thanks, Wendy. Because I have so many local options, I've actually never done quilts for Project Linus. I just know about it. Marlene, I buy flat sheets from Goodwill to practice on, then cut them up to create mat size and serge the edges and donate them to an animal shelter. Yep, great choices. And I mean, you can use them too for placemats at your table or whatever you choose to use them for. Christine, Dream Big panels are great for practicing feathers. I completely agree, Christine, and they're beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. I personally wouldn't qualify that as beginner level practicing. I think that's intermediate to be doing that kind of intricacy of feathers and trying to lay them in particular places and that sort of thing, but they are a great place to practice feathers for sure. Janice is saying, our county extension office makes lap throws for graduating seniors every year. They need quilters every year. That's a great idea. Again, if you ask around locally, like at local quilt shops or guild meetings, somebody there will know about these sorts of things. And I remember another one that I wanted to particularly mention, which is Quilts of Valor. So this is an organization, in case you haven't heard of it, that makes quilts for veterans, both, aged veterans and current ones. Anyone who's a veteran that has served in the U.S. and Canadian military. Quilts of Valor is North America wide. Chapters everywhere also. And again, someone is already volunteering to cut and piece those quilt tops, but they're always looking for quilters. And so that's a good option too. I wouldn't say they wouldn't be your first and second quilt, but maybe by the time you get to your 10th quilt, they're perfectly happy with edge-to-edge quilting and simple quilting, but you need to have just a little tiny bit of knowledge of, how to move around on that quilt top. We want to honor our veterans, right, with a beautiful quilt. Okay, you guys, any questions further about that? I'll natter on for a minute or two more while I wait for your comments to come in, and then we'll call it for today at that point. Janice is commenting, quilted jackets seem to be popular. You could cut up practice quilts into a simple jacket. You absolutely could. And, popular too is the ones that are like different. The sleeves are different from the back, which is different again from the front and the collar. So honestly, you really could chop up your practice pieces and make a quilted coat out of it. Not a bad idea. Okay, once again, I wanted to highlight I'm coming on to YouTube like this live every single day for 30 days. I believe this is day 12. So be sure and give me a thumbs up. If you give it a thumbs up every day that you enjoy it, that would be great. Share with your friends. Send this post afterwards. Share it out there so that I get a little more visible across YouTube. And it's just each day is a casual conversation about something machine quilting related. So next week I'll be back in my studio and I'll be showing you some of the things there, like how I store my batting and cut it to length, for example. Probably talking about my thread storage too, and maybe things like, what I think are some basic threads that every quilter should start with in terms of color. What's a nice little library of threads to have, that sort of thing from my studio. And then of course I'll have projects loaded on the long arm as well. So I'll be talking about my projects that are in progress at the same time. So thanks so much for joining me, you guys. Let's look back over just a couple questions. Daisy from Linden, Tennessee, and Charity, panels with simple pictures. I hadn't thought of that, Charity, but when you say it, it triggers my memory. I've got a panel at home that is for a child's book. And you really could quilt all over that, panel for a book, or, actual quilt panel chunks. It would be an easy way to practice tracing outlines, because those often have, pictorial things on them, and it would be a fun way to have something to quilt, to draw on. So I think that's it for today. Thanks you guys for joining me. Whatever you're doing today, enjoy it thoroughly, and I'll check in with you again tomorrow.